Well, thank you for having me today. I think it's been a while since I've spoken to the auditors. And as we get our technology pulled together here, because I didn't send my presentation in advance like I was supposed to, I'm so excited to see that the Indiana Association of Counties is supporting the bicentennial with the flags to each of the counties. That's wonderful. And the State Archives is fairly instrumental in the bicentennial projects. And so I'm going to start with what I was going to say at the end, and I'll start off with that, and talk to you a little bit about one of the bicentennial projects that we're working on. I'll tell you about two of them, actually, that might affect your counties. One is a project to commemorate the 43 men who in 1816 met in Corydon, Indiana. Is there anyone from Harrison County here today? Yes? Okay. So in Corydon, Indiana, the capital in 1816, the territorial capital, these 43 men came together, thank you, and they ended up deciding whether or not Indiana should become a state, first of all, and then if that was going to pass, they would write the Constitution. Well, you know that they decided to make a state, but interestingly, the vote on whether or not Indiana should proceed to statehood was not unanimous. There were 8 of the 40, there was only 42 guys there at the time. One of them hadn't gotten there yet. So 8 people voted against Indiana becoming a state. And the reason? Because if you became a state, then the people of Indiana had to pay taxes to support the government. And the way it was before that was the federal government paid for all of Indiana's territorial government. And so even in 1816, our representatives were very opposed to raising taxes or providing for the amount of funding necessary maybe to support government. So that goes all the way back to the beginning of our state. Anyhow, so they vote to become a state, they write the Constitution, and so those 43 men who've largely fallen off from the face of history, I would guess that most of you don't know many of their names. Some of you may not know any of their names, although there's 5 counties named after them. Those gentlemen are all going to be commemorated in June of 2016 at their burial sites. And so throughout mostly southern Indiana, but also in Allen County, in Fort Wayne, and in Delphi, or near Delphi, we will be commemorating those people's births and deaths and the things that they did for Indiana. So that's kind of an interesting project going on. And then the other one is in May and June of 2016, and also in December of 2016, the State Archives is putting together a big exhibit. And so it will travel to the 3 capitals of Indiana. First, Vincennes. Is Knox County here? Hello, Knox County. So we'll start in Vincennes in May, and the original Constitution from 1816, the current 1851 Constitution, the state rifle, the original flag of Indiana, the original prototype of the state flag, all those things are going to be at that exhibit. It will then, and there's other things, it'll go from Vincennes to Corydon, so it'll be in Corydon in June, and then it'll be in the state capitol in December of 2016. So I encourage you to come visit that. And the other big project we're working on, I'll talk about in the presentation. So, you guys are so lucky, you get to talk about numbers, finance, budgets, formulas, and now public records. How good can it get, right? Retention schedules, this is just, oh my gosh, you're so lucky. So, let's cover some basics. And for the, Debbie was referring to our new name, the Indiana Archives and Records Administration. We used to be called the Indiana Commission on Public Records. It's the same thing. When we're called the Commission on Public Records, what ends up happening is people think we have all the public records of all government. We get all these requests from around the world asking us, well, can you provide a copy of this or that? And so we wanted to make it clear in people's minds that we're much more like the National Archives and Records Administration in Washington, D.C., than the FOIA office, the Freedom of Information kind of office. So that's part of the reason we clarified our name. But we do the same things. Anyhow, so a government record. So in Indiana, we use the term public records, which in a legal sense is a government record. A public record in the legal sense does not necessarily mean a record that is open to the public. It simply means an official government record, okay? So a government record, and this is very broad, and this is straight out of the statute, any writing, paper, report, study map, photograph, card, tape recording, or other materials, including electronic records, by the way, email, spreadsheets, etc., that are created, received, retained, maintained, used, or filed by a public agency in which is generated on paper or paper substitute, photographic media, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, regardless of forms or characteristics. So almost anything coming into or being generated out of your offices is considered a public record. Isn't that exciting to know? But we'll tell you through the presentation today how those should be handled, what you can get rid of, how to get rid of them, et cetera. So how many of you are new, relatively new to your office? Okay. How many of you have ever heard this presentation before? Or a couple of you? Okay. Well, good for you. I'm going to have you come up. No, I'm just kidding. Okay. So as I kind of alluded, one of the things you need to understand is records are not on paper. They could be on all sorts of things, okay? So whether it's a film, website, email, database, something you've scanned digitally, audio files, social media, and then the metadata and indexes around some of those things, all that is still considered a record. So there's some controls that have to be in place, and there's retention schedules to help guide that process. So we deal with record retention, and record retention basically says, for this kind of material, you need to keep it for this long, okay? And so generally, the records management staff at our agency has developed retention schedules for the auditor's office, for the county at large, for state government, that kind of direct how we deal with certain types of records that are being created or received by your offices. There's a few things that we look at to determine how long something should be retained: the administrative or fiscal value, the legal value. So if we get rid of this document and the county's sued, have we just thrown away the evidence that proves we did or did not pay something, for instance? So that's part of the factor. Public demand and interest. So will someone be interested in this 20 years from now or 50 years from now? And so therefore there's some historical value to the documents or public demand to the documents. And then this is so significant, whatever this document is, that we probably should keep it in perpetuity forever. So even in theory, a stone tablet, if it was a government record, should be retained, right? The format does not matter. The media does not matter to us. It's all the content that drives retention. So these are a list of the schedules that currently exist at the local level of government. And I believe that the county auditor serves on the Oversight Committee on Public Records. So there's a change in the law, which I don't think I'll address later, so I'll mention it to you now. Every county has a county commission on public records, which is required by statute to meet annually, at least annually. It can meet more often than that. And they review things that are being requested for destruction in the county, things that different office holders throughout the local government want to have destroyed. Those meetings are fairly important. The law was changed in the last session of the legislature so that the auditor does not have to serve personally, but can send a designee from the auditor's office, okay? That is true for almost all the officers. I think it may be true for all the officers or offices that were represented on that county commission. So we're trying to make it easier for that group to get together more frequently and to actually meet. So the auditor, him or herself do no longer need to serve on that thing personally, but there should be a representative from the auditor's office. So make a note of that. So this is the list. The auditor has its own schedule. There's a judicial or a clerk's schedule, coroner, et cetera. There's a couple of new schedules that have been created. We're in the midst of fleshing out a prosecutor's schedule, but it's already started and online. There's a new land schedule for the zoning related stuff, planning, development, and also a public-private agreements schedule for public-private partnerships with the city or the county. So that now exists. We are in the process of establishing a law enforcement schedule. We're in this process of updating the school retention schedule, and I'll talk about those, I think, in a second. So the general retention schedule, which applies to most of the records that are generated in local government, is divided into 5 sections, and these are all online, so you can go onto our website and see the retention schedule, and And because the auditor's office has lots of records, you may want to be a little bit more familiar with this and kind of look online to see what's out there. So the retention schedules, the general retention schedule for local government is split into 5 sections. Administrative, which affects you because you are the secretary for the county commissioners and generally the county council, or your office serves that function. And so minutes are supposed to be kept forever, a very long time, forever. There's other things in there like correspondence, that's a 3-year retention. So all those things are stipulated in the administrative section. The second one is accounting and finance, also obviously affects you. And so you have to keep grants for 10 years, expense records are 10 years, receipt records I think are 5 years. So all that kind of stuff is stipulated in there. Personnel, so the payroll records, how long are those kept? That's in there. Timesheets, if you still use those, or whatever the substitute is, that's in there. So a lot of guidance on each one of those things. There's a section about kind of the last 2 are kind of miscellaneous things, publications and reports. So if the county were to publish an annual report, how long is it supposed to be retained? And then the last, audio, video, and general media. There has been some, just for your information, you can share this with the rest of the county if you have the opportunity. There is a new retention specifically related to body cameras and dash cams, kind of law enforcement stuff. So those are supposed to be retained for 30 days unless there is something captured on there that could be litigated. So if the body cam captures a crime occurring or something has occurred and there's this dispute, that then ends up being kept. But otherwise, they can be recycled every 30 days. So that's in there. That may not affect you directly, but as a member of the oversight committee locally, it's probably important for you to know that. And don't feel hesitant to ask questions either. I may not know the answer, but I'm certainly willing to make one up for you. Other local schedules that you might want to be aware of, there's a cities and towns schedule. There's a special district schedule. There's a township trustee schedule. There used to be 2 cities and towns schedules. We combined those together. There's also schedules for the libraries. There's this care of public schools. That's going to be completely revamped. So it'll be a much shortened schedule. Right now that's 143 pages, and we're down to about 14 pages, so we've worked very hard to get that cleaned up. There is also a judicial schedule for the courts that we work with the Supreme Court on to help make that public to all of you. And then lastly, there will be a new law enforcement schedule, probably in the next 6 to 9 months will be out, to help give them some guidance as well. So, anyone know who this guy is? I think I heard it over there. That's right. One of our most notorious criminals, John Dillinger, he did not, however, he did a lot of things, but he did not destroy public records early. He knew not to do that. So, if someone intentionally destroys a public record before it is supposed to be destroyed, you're actually committing a Class 6 felony. So it's actually considered a fairly serious issue. So don't do that. That's why those retention schedules are pretty important. So a public official may not, as you see on the side here, may not mutilate, destroy, sell, or otherwise dispose of any government record except under a retention schedule or with the written consent of the Commission on Public Records, our old name, now the Indiana Archives and Records Administration. Okay? I'm going to kind of switch topics a little bit here, or get a little bit more refined in our conversation and talk about the 4 basically levels of retention. And this is really, think about email in particular right now. So transitory records can be destroyed immediately. So what would that be? Well, in the paper world, if I'm sent magazines, unsolicited information from vendors, actually if it's on paper or if it's an email, those can be destroyed, okay? Mm-hmm. If you're getting spam messages, vendors are sending unsolicited things to the auditor's office saying, we have this service, would you like to buy it, blah, blah. You don't have to keep that. You can delete that immediately out of your email, all right? If you're headed home and you're going to email your spouse and say, hey, do I need to stop by and pick up milk at the grocery store? Yes, no, whatever. That doesn't need to be kept either. There's no relationship to work in there. It's a transitory message. If you go to lunch with one of your friends and they send a note back in, hey, thanks for lunch, it was great seeing you again, transitory, doesn't have to be kept, okay? So that kind of stuff can instantly be deleted out of the email system, or it could be thrown away into the trash can if it's on paper. Then there's the actual things that are on the retention schedule that do need to be kept. So short-term things, I mentioned correspondence, right? 3-year requirement to maintain correspondence in Indiana. Then you've got longer-term things that are more than 10 years. So contracts are the life of the contract plus 10 years after. So there's a bunch of things that fall into that category. And then there's those that are permanent. And unfortunately, for you, a lot of these old, big, oversized books in your office are permanent. And I want to touch on that before I finish today. And if I forget, someone raise their hand, because I think we probably should have a conversation and see if there's some things that we can do to update part of your schedule and see if some of those long-term permanent things, we can change them around some way and lessen the burden on the counties to reformat or do something with those records. So anyhow, that's kind of the way the retentions break out, and there's different things that affect some of this. So if you have permanent records, we're beginning to move away from this, but this is still a process at this point. Anything that is considered permanent in Indiana can either be retained in its original format, so paper, possibly electronic, or it can be converted to microfilm, which would substitute for the original format. So if you have a whole bunch of oversized books or whatever you're dealing with, a lot of volume, you can convert all that to microfilm, and then you don't have to keep those original paper documents, for instance. That's one option. If you digitize permanent records, and this is starting to change a little bit, but if you digitize permanent records or they are submitted electronically, they may also be required to be converted to microfilm. And we have the ability to do that to help you. We have a lab that does that kind of stuff. Where I want to share with you a change is that I think what is happening is we are now trying to get to a point where born electronic, things that are created electronically, or digitized content, as long as there are enough redundant systems in place, those may now suffice for electronic, may be acceptable as the only format that exists. But there's a whole series of tests that have to be passed to get there, okay? And to be very specific, I'm going to use something not from your office, but another office. Let's talk about the health department's birth certificates. So if the county health department wanted to digitize all of its birth certificates and throw away all the original birth certificates, in theory, that could be possible if there were redundant systems in place to make sure that there were adequate backups available so that we could recreate that, okay? Birth certificates are really significant. It proves who you are, who your parents were. All sorts of rights are derived from the fact that you were born a U.S. citizen, et cetera, et cetera. So our obligation is to make sure that we don't find ourselves in a situation where there's a document or a record that is supposed to have been created, was created, someone digitized it, the hard drive crashes, they got rid of the paper. Now that the hard drive crashed, there's nothing left. That is a calamity from our perspective, right? And probably from the citizens and likely from your office's perspective. So we want to make sure that if you are to digitize something and you want to get rid of the original format, the paper, that there are multiple copies of that in multiple places so that if the courthouse burns down and maybe you had a backup copy, it was on 2 different servers, but the whole courthouse is gone, and so you lost everything anyhow, that really didn't solve the problem. So we want to make sure that there's at least 3 copies. One copy could be in the courthouse, or it could be a backup somewhere else, and another copy well off-site, maybe as much as 50 miles away. So that if there's a tornado or some kind of calamity, massive flooding, it doesn't affect every copy of that document, okay? So that's kind of the threshold we're beginning to create for how we want to deal with electronic records as the only permanent format. all right? One thing I really like about this group so far, not a single question. That's good. Okay. Why do archivists and public records people despise electronic records? It's a little strong, but I suspect that most of you have probably had a situation where your computer hard drive crashes, and so you've lost all that content, or there's a lot of expense to go back and recreate it. You become technology dependent. Is anyone still operating with Windows 93? Okay, you've got operating system challenges. How about, I can't remember the name of it now. You've got all these different word processing companies from the early 80s and 90s that are no longer in play, right? It's really complicated to take old old electronic records and access them today. So one of the things the State Archives is working on currently is migrating old electronic formats into things that can be accessed today. So WordPerfect 1.0, I'm betting most of you are going to have a challenge opening that file. So those are the kinds of challenges that we're faced with electronic records. The benefit, of course, to electronic records is they're great for access. You type in the last name Corridon, boom, here's all the records. A lot faster than having to look through stacks and stacks of files or going through file cabinets, but from a preservation standpoint, not the best. Okay, so I've kind of touched on some of this. We are doing things in electronic records now. We are developing some systems to try and maintain electronic records at the state level, and we want to do the same for the counties. We're looking at developing a pilot project so that county governments can transfer permanent electronic records to a state repository, so that can be one of these redundant silos we've been talking about. So if there's a place in Indianapolis where we could store your records, you'd have a copy of it locally, and then you're good to go as far as meeting some of those requirements we've been discussing. There's 4 things that we're really concerned with electronic records. One is authenticity. We want to make sure that the records truly are the authentic record. Again, this is all important with government records to make sure that no one's tampered with anything. The record is complete and unaltered. That's integrity. The reliability, we want to make sure that it's all intact. So one of the problems with keeping electronic records for long periods of time, the state of Arizona digitized their entire photo collection from the state library, all the historic photos of Arizona. After 10 years, they put them all on CDs. So after 10 years, some of those images, started to migrate into each other, kind of merge into each other. And so you'd have, for instance, the downtown cityscape of Phoenix sitting in the middle of the Grand Canyon, right? So over time, bits and bytes start to disintegrate, and the longer they're retained, the worse off it's going to be. So one of the challenges with electronic records is you just can't put it on a server or a CD, put it on a file cabinet or a shelf somewhere, and let it sit for 100 years. There will be nothing there. And we are finding that out in spades at the archives right now, because we were given tons and tons of 3.5-inch floppies and 5.25-inch floppies and 8.5-inch floppies and 10-inch floppies, to tell you the truth. And as we try to go back and access even the 3.25-inch floppies, almost half of them, 40% of them, are coming up as unformatted. Well, we can tell there's stuff written on the outside of them. There was stuff on there, but they're no longer accessible. And that's probably just 10 to 15 years ago, right? And some of the stuff's supposed to be kept forever. So again, it comes back to the whole electronic records thing. We want to make sure there's redundancy so we can make sure those things are correctly accessible. When we're doing stuff with electronic records, we're also adding hashtags, algorithms, or logarithms onto the record so that we can check for degradation of the files, which I'm sure is probably not something you're working on yet at your levels, but we want to add that in. Lastly, we want to make sure that the record is usable and retrievable. So a lot of times people are saying, I don't think I have a picture of it here. You're all welcome to come to the Indianapolis and see the State Archives and the Record Center right now. We're hopefully moving, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But it's a massive warehouse. It looks like part of it is a massive warehouse, the Record Center. and it looks like Raiders of the Lost Ark at the end, where the ark's put up in some high warehouse somewhere. That's what one of our facilities looks like. And I totally forgot why I was telling you that. Isn't that great? So we have a huge volume of records there, and I don't know where I was going, but it's a great story. So come visit us. It'll come back to me at some point, I'm sure. Another thing that I want to touch on is the SHRAB, and the State Historic Records Advisory Board offers grants, and these grants are opening this month, and the grant cycle closes at the end of the month. I want to share this with you because if you have records in the courthouse and in the auditor's office that you would like to see digitized, we could provide a grant of up to $5,000 to get that done. There's a match required. It doesn't have to be a cash match, but if you have, high school students or a college or something nearby, and they're willing to be interns for free or whatever, if you can come up with a way to match that money, these are federal dollars that we have available. We can provide a grant to you to digitize some of your old historical records, or they may not even be old, but they may be records that are, for whatever reason, in peril. They're in really bad shape. They're frequently requested. We'll be happy to have you apply for a grant and maybe fund a project in your county. And then all that stuff will end up online. So we'll require some metadata indexes for it and also the images, and then we'll put that on our website, and you're welcome to put it on your website. It may be that there's some records that you're constantly having to access that are in paper to be a lot easier for you to also have a digital copy of. So here's some grant funds to help make that happen. So the deadline information is there. Again, this is on our website. If you go to in.gov/IARA, you'll see SHRAB grants, and you can apply for some of those there. Another thing that we offer every year is workshops. And so we have provided workshops in the past on preservation of records, basic archival stuff, dealing with electronic records, and then government records and retention schedules. We also provide, this is not SHRAB, but the agency, we also provide a service where we'll come to the courthouse, meet with the office holders, go through the courthouse storage spaces, and help you identify things that can be destroyed now that are past retention. Because I know this is hard to believe, but sometimes there's like massive amounts of records that never get cleaned up in the courthouse. Does that ever happen? No. And so people just kind of put things all over the place, and then suddenly there's no more space anywhere. So every so often we'll go out and we'll visit a county and we'll help identify all these can be destroyed now, these have to be kept, these can be digitized, whatever. We'll go through and do that. We just did that in Monroe County, I think maybe 6 months ago or so. Okay? Another service. This may or may not be of interest to some of you, but ICPR, now IARA, is working with the Supreme Court and Ancestry.com and Family Search. And we are working to convert all the probate records in Indiana, so out of the clerk's office, over to digital and make them available both at the archives, Family Search, and Ancestry. And that may take a burden off of clerk's offices for people coming in requesting access to those old historical records. The same thing is true with Ancestry, working with the state archives. The birth, death, and marriage records of Indiana will all be made available online in 2016 through Ancestry and at the state archives. Yes, ma'am. Yeah, a little bit. No. What really is happening here is the state could never afford to digitize. We're talking, the birth, death, and marriage records are 20 million pages in Indiana. And so there was no way we would ever digitize all that. So Ancestry did that for us at no cost. That's the win. The state archives is going to get, if anyone joins Ancestry after visiting one of these sites, then the state archives gets like I don't know, a quarter for each person or something. And thus far, we've gotten 0. So in theory, there's going to be some level of money coming in. They guess that it'd probably be about $10,000 a year at most. So we're not. No, none of it comes back to the counties. Yeah. What should happen for the counties is that you won't get the inundation of all these requests for those records anymore because they'll be available online.
Except that's part of what funds being able to maintain the records.
In the clerk's office? Yeah. Okay. I hear you. We'll think about whether we can develop a broader grant program. Okay. And the question up here, yes, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you for walking around with the microphone. I should have repeated the question.
You don't walk very fast. I guess this is just a follow-up then to reiterate, then in order to have access to these records that are going to be on Ancestry.com, you will have to have a subscription to Ancestry.com?
So there's 2 pieces to that question. There's 2 answers to that question. Yes and no. How's that? So in the first 3 years that the records are online, you can access them directly through Ancestry for a subscription fee. After the first 3 years, the state archives can put them all up online, and they will be free. That's all the first answer, okay? So that was the yes. The no is, once those things are digitized, we are working with Ancestry to do 2 things. One, they will automatically be free if you come to the state archives building, and you can log on for free then, because we've been given access to all the records through Ancestry, so there's no charge. That's the first half of the second answer. The second half of that answer is we are working with Ancestry to provide a way for all the citizens of Indiana to have access immediately. And we will likely do that by either doing, not to get too technical, IP authentication. So based on where your internet address is located, if it's an Indiana-based internet address, you'd get access. Or we'll do it through the BMV, so if you have a driver's license. Our preference is to do the IP authentication, but we have to set all that up, and we haven't done it yet. So that's all that. And that's really the birth, death, and marriage. On the probate record side, because Family Search is involved, Family Search's records are all available for free, period. So once that's all digitized, it will likely be available on Family Search for free. Okay? Great question. Sorry for the long, complicated answer. Yes?
This is taking a step backwards to the grant. What conditions are there around the grant if we were to apply for that, get a match from the council? What conditions go along with that grant?
So
if we were to use
by
it?
conditions, we want to make sure that you're dealing with record. When we judge what are priorities, for the county, we're going to compare your grant application against other grant applications, obviously, and determine, are these records at risk, or is there some reason why these records should be a high priority, okay? We're going to, one of the time constraints is you have about a year to do the grant. So if it's a 20-year project, that's not a good situation. We have traditionally looked, and especially right now, we're kind of still looking at early Indiana records or early county records because of the bicentennial. We want to kind of promote early Indiana. I think those are the main things. So at risk, historical, bad shape, those are the things that are going to get you high. The time constraint's the only other one. It's about a year-long project. You're also required to create metadata around it. So that's where I was going with that whole, thank you for bringing this up, the whole warehouse massive thing. So it all ties together. Watch this. When people suggest, oh, we'll just index all your records or digitize all your records, and then we wouldn't have to build a new warehouse and whatever. It's easy to digitize, right? We can digitize about a penny a page or so, but it's creating the metadata, the indexing around that to find each individual page where the expense comes in.
Right.
So there is a requirement that there's metadata around the things that you're digitizing.
Okay, so we would have to have some type of software in place for indexing.
It can be as simple as Excel or Access, and then you would just transfer the digital records plus let's say it's an Excel file, in a format, in having the right fields in it, to us, and we would just load that all up for you. So it's not necessarily special software, but there needs to be something that's captured the indexes.
Okay. Then one more question. The grant, then part of that is that the records would go to you. Is that right? Are
We
you
would get
saying
it, you
that?
keep a copy, but we also get a copy.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes,
All right.
ma'am. Yep.
Okay. I think you've answered all
Yeah.
my questions.
Thank you, and thank you for reminding me why I was going to the warehouse. Yeah. So honestly, so our warehouse, this record center, right? This is not the permanent records, these are temporary records. We have about somewhere around 750 million to 1 billion pages of records in there. And so people have suggested that we just digitize those records. Well, first of all, that's going to be, I don't know, $10 million in itself, which we're not going to do just to scan them. But then the metadata to find all that stuff would just be so expensive. So, yeah, thank you for bringing that up. Yes, ma'am.
We had our annual retention record meeting a couple years ago, and all of the office holders brought lists of books that thought we could have
Destroyed.
done
or-
away with.
Yes.
We sent that in, but we've never heard anything back from it, the archival department.
Which,
What would you suggest?
which county are you from?
Huntington?
Huntington? Well, we have a warrant out for Huntington, and so we don't. So normally what happens in this process, if something is on a retention schedule, okay, and it says it can be destroyed, and you send your report in saying we want to destroy these things, if within 60 days you haven't heard from us, if within 60 days you don't hear back from us, you're good to destroy it, okay? If in the 60 days we write back, it's because there's something that we either want transferred to the archives, isn't supposed to be destroyed, or we have more clarity for. That's the way we're set up right now, okay? Good question, though. Okay. Just because I said you didn't have to ask any questions didn't mean you had to inundate me all at once. All right, let me talk about some other things that are going on at the statewide level. So the agency has purchased new software that we're working to roll out, and we think it should help in a lot of different ways. You probably don't know this, but the archives has holdings from the county auditors from many counties, some of which go back to the beginning of the state, and there might even be some county auditor or county assessor related records that go back from before statehood from your counties, for those of you that had counties before statehood. You wouldn't know that because we didn't really know exactly what we had because we've never done a complete inventory. We have been working for the last 2 years to do this inventory. We probably have 6 months left to go, but when it is done, we're going to be loading all the collections of the state archives into this inventory system. And so you would be able to go online and say, let's say you're from Franklin County, type in Franklin County, and it would show all the different things that are held at the state archives from Franklin County. And it would also show the offices. So you could click on auditor, and it would show, you know, tax duplicates from 1837, 1838, 1839, whatever, in the system. And then the benefit, of course, is now suddenly the citizens of Indiana, you can come up and see what we have or call and ask a question about something, one of the books that we have or whatever. So there'll be a lot more transparency as far as our holdings. There's that piece of this software. Another thing that's going to occur is the retention schedules will all be built into the software. And so you will, when this is up and online sometime in early 2016, the retention schedules will be available and accessed through there. Another piece of this is when we talk about the grants and the grant products, the actual digital images, all those indexes, the metadata, and the images will be in that system as well. So you'll search everything in one place. You can find all this stuff on the same set of software. The Record Center, which is where we store the temporary stuff, that's the massive warehouse I was talking about, all their stuff will also be there. Generally, that's a state facility. There aren't really county records in there. But it'll provide so much more transparency to what's going on and what records are being retained. In a perfect world, when we have all that figured out and running correctly, And then the other little bullet point on this slide is new state archives, which I'll talk about. When that process is done, what we'd really like to do is begin to roll this out across the state so that the county courthouse would be a location, just like the state archives, the state record center would be locations. Well, now there's a Franklin County Courthouse or Knox County Courthouse, and that would list the things that are currently stored in those locations, and then you would have access to this tool to manage the records that are in the courthouse. So you'd manage the auditor's piece, other agencies or other elected officials would manage their own records. But that way you can say, wait, there should be these records somewhere here that are supposed to be destroyed this year. And there'll actually be a process and a system to allow you to better manage the courthouse records across the system, okay? It's going to be a few years because we've got to deal with this massive thing that we're trying to get fixed. And then we're going to be also working on a new state archives building. But when those two things are done, we really want to see this rolled out to the county so that you have this resource. And I think it will really help you guys manage records much better at the local level. Okay? Let me talk also about the State Archives building. So I would guess, have any of you ever been to the current State Archives building? Well, congratulations and thank you for that. You should all come in the next couple of years because it's not going to be the State Archives anymore, hopefully. Governor Pence and the legislature appropriated $25 million to build a new State Archives building, which we know for sure will be in Indiana. And we are hopeful it will be in Marion County. We think it may be in Indianapolis. It's possibly be downtown, and beyond that, we're not really sure. We're pretty sure it's going to be in downtown, really. And we're working with architects currently to try and figure a lot of this out and how big it's going to be and how it's all going to fit together and all that stuff. But we're going to go from, this is all going to be bad now, so I never said this, do not ever quote me. We're going to go from a really crappy bad facility to a state-of-the-art facility, one that we can really be proud of. Indiana currently has, and I didn't say this either, the worst facility in the United States, no joke. We have the worst state archives building in the country. And so we will go from there to one of the top 5 or 10. And we're excited because the legislature really wants to see some exhibit space built in. So we'll put some of your local records on display for the public to see in our exhibits. Currently, there's not really any formal exhibit space. There'll be classrooms. So when we have workshops and stuff, there'll actually be dedicated classroom space. For the last 15 years, we've not allowed really student groups to come through because we're not in a very good neighborhood. And that will change. So we'll start to encourage fourth graders to come in and see directly from primary sources, because that's what we keep, right? All the original of things. So the original Constitution, the original first law passed by the state of Indiana, all that stuff will be there on display and available to the public. So we're very excited about the possibilities here, and we would encourage you in 2018 or so to come visit us when the new State Archives building opens. You're all invited. It's a public building. You're welcome to come. So please think about that and help us. And you may even want to pray for us to get this thing done, but it's a whole different problem. Okay, so here's some information about where the schedules are located. And it says schedules.icpr.in.gov. That will still get you there. Or you can go to schedules.iara. They both point to the same thing. But this is how you can get to the county schedules and to the general records retention schedules for local government. So your auditor's schedule is here, okay? And there's a specific schedule, as I mentioned, for auditors, which gets into much more detail about specific records that were created by or are created by the auditor's office and how long they have to be kept. Am I done now, Debbie, or do I have 15 minutes? Okay, I'm almost done, which will really mess you up. Okay, so notice of destruction. One of the questions was about getting rid of things. What's the process? It wasn't quite what's the process, but this is the process. So if there are things on a retention schedule, you're supposed to fill out one of these state forms and submit it to the local commission, and then that allows the destruction process to go forward. And if you don't hear within 60 days, of course, then you can go ahead and destroy the things. But that's what this is all about, this form, all right? And a copy of that form gets sent to the state, and that's where we do our review and say, everything looks good here, or there's a problem. There's also this form, State Form 30505, or what we call PR1, and this is a form to destroy something that isn't on a retention schedule. So it's either really old or for some reason it's unique, and you can either use this form to destroy it, or request to destroy it, or to transfer it to like the local historical society or the genealogical society or something at the local level, or it could be transferred to the state archives. And so this form does not have a 60-day rule like the other form. This form actually requires permission for something to happen, okay? So if something's on a retention schedule, it kind of flies through the process because it's been standardized. This is like the one-off things, like you find an 1817 something that the auditor's office did, and no one knows what to do with it. That's what goes onto this kind of form, okay? Clear? And this also gets, they both end up ultimately getting sent off to the state, to our agency. We touched on the local commission on public records. I talked about the change in the law. So remember that you or someone from your office is supposed to serve on that when they meet, and now you're experts on what your role is, so I'm really happy for all of you. And now you're really messed up, Debbie. Any other questions? Or anything about the bicentennial? Yes, ma'am. They'll walk over a mic.
I have a quick voice. Is this presentation going to be on the website anywhere?
Yes, I can give it to State Board of Accounts, and we've put it up also. So you have it. So Debbie will put it up for you.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. The question was, will this be online? Okay. Yes, ma'am. No. The question was, are the county commissioners in charge of the local county commission? The answer is no. There is one officer that is statutory, and that's the secretary of the commission, and the county clerks or the county clerk or the county recorder is the secretary. Okay? There's this long process that was created 2 years ago or 3 years ago by the clerks, because they used to always be the secretary. But the way it works now is the county clerk and the county recorder have a conversation. They determine which one wants to be the secretary. If neither one of them wants to be, then at the first commission meeting, there's an election, and apparently the loser gets to be the secretary. So that works. And so, but those two are the ones who, one of those two is the one who actually drives the process. And then oftentimes, but not required, there's a judge, and one of the judges has oftentimes been the chair, but it can be any of the members other than whichever one's the secretary, okay? And they are required to call those meetings annually, because in theory, if you don't have those meetings annually, you aren't allowed to get rid of anything, right? Nothing can be destroyed. Well, that's crazy and chaos, so, okay? All right, yes, ma'am. And this is great. The best part of this is this lovely lady is going from side to side of this room.
They deliberately do it. I can tell that. I just want to know if you're available later for questions and information.
Yes, my consulting fee for availability is $100 an hour. No, I shouldn't even joke. I'm probably going to go to ethics prison now.
I am recording this. I'm sorry.
That's all right. No, yeah, I'll be here for a few minutes, so that's not a problem. Yep. Is there a question on this side of the room, please? Okay. Well, again, I encourage all of you to come up to Indianapolis if you haven't been there, or come down, depending where you are. One last thing, this is very important, and I hope some of the officers of the association are still in the room. I'll pretend they are if they're not. If not, if someone could get the message to them. Are you an officer? No. Okay. I would like to ask if we could get maybe 3, 4, 5 auditors or people from the auditor's office to work with us in the next 12 months, and let's look at the actual auditor's schedule and figure out, are there things that you're being required to keep that you're not sure why, because no one ever requests? I'd like to kind of do a synopsis or an analysis of, gosh, we have to keep all these, I know this is a sore subject, tax duplicate books, and we never have had anyone ever come in here and look for one, or any of the old ones, right? Probably because you don't even know where they are anymore. And so let's have a conversation about that so that we can look at cleaning up this schedule even further and see if there's a necessity to keep some of these things that we're requiring you to keep currently, okay? So that's my challenge to you guys. And with that, I'm going to disappear. So thank you all very much, and I appreciate the time.